I think as brands and as SEO professionals, sure, we do have power to, tap into these new behaviors, but we probably need to be more attuned with deeper ways of thinking about the user. And we need to give them a bit more credit because I think sometimes we tend to think about the user as this like bot thing that just like goes and taps into results that we manipulated to serve to a click. But it's not really like that. Like we need to really give a bit more credit to the user that we're trying to connect with.
Welcome to the second episode of a search session. And today we are going to talk about the increasingly and fastly changing behavior of people when searching for information on internet. And we are going to have, as you're already seeing here, two wonderful guests. Giulia Panozzo, who is the founder of Neuroscientive, correct? Pronounce it correct?
Neuroscientive.
Neuroscientive. And she is a neuroscientist turned marketer, as she defined herself on LinkedIn. She has a BSc in psychology and an MSc in neuroscience. And Giulia describes herself as someone who helps brands make marketer smarter decision by using first-party data and neuroscience-backed insights to boost engagement and visibility and so on. Garrett Sussman is the director of marketing at iPullRank, and probably you will know him already because he's very vocal with the podcast Rankable and very visible thanks to the video the SEO Weekly. And also he has spoken to really important conferences in the world. Giulia at Brighton SEO, where she's going to speak again in next April, if I'm not wrong. And Garrett, you talked last year at Moscow, and I don't know, you're maybe going to be very active in the SEO week that iPullRank is organizing for the next month, if I am also in April, no? Okay. So a wonderful idea that iPullRank had to increase the SEO events, to bring them also on the East Coast instead of having them just in the classic location like Austin, Las Vegas, and the West Coast. So let's talk about this topic, which surely is underlying all the decisioning changes that the biggest player, Google, being the new player, OpenAI, but also smaller and less known brands like Perplexity, or now even Grok, because we may or not like the guy behind Grok, but Grok is not bad as an AI. And it now offers, with its version 3, interesting option for searchers. So these players are driving, but also are taking advantage of what was already there, search, a change in the behavior about how people are searching. A few years ago was quite big, the rumors about how the youngest generation use TikTok and Instagram for searches, especially when it comes to search for local searches and business close to them, restaurant and things like this. And this was a first hint that something was changing. So how do you believe this search behavior really is something that is present and taking velocity now?
So I think that, to your point, it's fascinating right now. The last 24 months have been all different new channels, new ways of searching. One thing we need to keep in mind is Google still dominates the search market. So they still have 90% of the search market. That said, we think about the old days with keyword search and how, Google kind of trained us. It didn't understand all of our searches. So we just use 1, 2, 3 words to find what we're looking for and manipulate our searches to get exactly the right types of results. Now, in the last 7 to 10 years, with the development of algorithmic tools like our large language models, you got BERT and MUM, it really understands natural language processing so much more effectively. So we can use much more complex searches. And so over time, people are starting to learn that how they can search changes. they can, talk like a person in their search. And that ultimately gives us different types of results, gives us better results. The problem with that is there's a range of different cognitive biases, the way that we search, that influences these search results. The words that we use, the search results that we get are all influenced by our context and our perspective. And so that naturally changes search behavior, and brands need to pay attention to that and make sure that they're building content that appeals to what people are actually searching.
Yeah, and I think one of the things to take into account is as search behavior changes, we need to take into account that people are, at every moment, as Garrett mentions, there's cognitive biases that come into play because we're bombarded with so many stimuli as users. There's 1,000 different things that come into our field of vision, or even like when we hear things, and we need to really focus on something to make a decision. So whatever can make that process streamlined, especially in a search that can be, like the first thing we do in the morning, or like can be the 1,000 search we do in a day. Anything that can help with ease of decision is actually something that we're probably going to become more and more attuned with. So I know that we spoke recently about, voice search was a thing, or like everyone was like, oh, voice search is becoming a thing. And then it never really picked up the way that we thought it would, or like the way that we were, yeah, told it would. However, searches now are more conversations. And I think brands should for sure tap into understanding what kind of information and how users frame their questions, because it can already tell what they're looking to achieve with their first query, but also trying to embrace other things such as, search behavior, and the search query is just one part of a bigger journey, which is the entire search experience. And throughout it, humans try to have the easiest, the easiest sort of experience, the fastest way to a decision, because the brain is essentially a big predictive machine. So challenging schemes that are already predetermined, or like challenging decisions that are almost made, like in the case of confirmation bias that Garrett talked about, is going to take, it's going to be challenging. It's going to have to be worth it. So yeah, I think as brands and as SEO professionals, sure, we do have power to, tap into these new behaviors, but we probably need to be more attuned with deeper ways of thinking about the user. And we need to give them a bit more credit, because I think sometimes we tend to think about the user as this like bot thing that just like goes and taps into results that we manipulated to serve to a click. But it's not really like that. Like we need to really give a bit more credit to the user that we're trying to connect with.
It's interesting that you first, Garrett, you were talking about mom, because actually we still don't have any kind of real mom on the search results, but neither in LLM's answer. Is maybe the technology is still not there, even if they test. But also, Julia, you were also saying another thing which is interesting, because you were saying conversational search, but it's not just conversational search. Maybe conversational search is the most mainstream definition that we have now, but it's more like mm, should be just search, because we know we are marketers, especially SEO. We really tend to forget things very fast. And just 2 years ago, we were really talking about visual search and lens, and nobody's talking about it now anymore. But actually, is still pay attention to it, and it's interesting because we always say about all these LLMs, but we always forget about the evolution of image processing and recognition image. So one of the biggest advancements that we had with Google is not just about Lens, which is really spreading its usage, but also the possibility to do Lens searches in on video. So this is really opening the opportunity for having a multi content type of search. So starting with can be another definition of a classic definition I love it, which is the messy middle. So as messy middle is starting from an image, because I don't know how to call it, that thing that I want to search, and then going, asking details with a search GPT, and then going to Google to find a local business, because search GPT is still substantially crap in local search, and then going on Reddit because I want a confirmation about that business in particular. So this is really expanding how people, the messy middle concept, so people not really not doing a search or something like, which is starting with a query and stopping and immediately terminating with a click, which is something that I think many SEO or many friends still don't have really understood.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I mean, to your point, we're so used to thinking of the marketing funnel, right? Starting with awareness and going all the way down to making a purchase. But in 2020, Google did that messy middle study where they saw that the way that people interact with searches, because we're complex, it's this infinite loop of exploration and evaluation, exploration, evaluation. You find something, you come back, and all of these different bias play into what we choose. I mean, we were talking in this conversation before about the authority bias and how do we decide what can we trust? And there are all of these signals that appear on search, all of these different trust signals, whether it's online reviews or just brand visibility. We talk a lot about like if you know a brand, you're so much more likely to click on that brand because you're familiar with it. You already like it. Think about like news sources, for instance. If I go and search for what's happening in the news, and I see 5 different publications, and we know they're all biased, left, right, political, up, down. I'm gonna go to the news source that I have an affinity with, that I'm familiar with, that I trust, and it's gonna give me the best information. And that's becoming the biggest issue, especially with all the AI out there, is how do we figure out what information we can trust? There is always a search engine bias where we trust Google to actually provide us with like whatever is ranked highest is this implicit admission of trustworthiness from Google. Google saying it's the best. And now we're putting AI overviews on top of this. And this is fundamentally changing the way that people interact with search results.
Uh, yes, yes. And I don't know if Julia can confirm this sort of gut sensation that I have, that people is so used to trust Google somehow, even if there is more people vocal about how the search results are not so good as they were before. But naturally, people, and I mean, the majority of people trust what they find on Google and trust Google. So probably we are going to trust also these AI generated answer, even if they don't then go click and to see what are the sources. Is this something real or is it just a thing I'm thinking?
No, I mean there is like this authority bias that Garrett was talking about, and I think it's like it conveys the need for people and for humans to trust the source. Like we want to believe somebody that's trustworthy. Like they've shown a number of studies where they pair the same information with two different authors, and then consistently people believe the most to somebody that's like a medical doctor, for example, because it's just like the figure of authority. But I think what's the variable, I guess, that we need to take into account is how savvy are our users and how critical are are our users, because there's definitively something like digital literacy, I guess, that plays a part. If I was to look at somebody who works every day with a search engine, obviously I wouldn't expect them to trust the first result on Google. However, somebody else who relies on Facebook for the news of the day, for example, or somebody else who doesn't, like just maybe does a number of searches during the day all on Google, then it's more likely that they trust that information better because they rely a bit more on this perceived authority. And I think that kind of puts, a big firm, how do you call, question mark on
Mhm.
how we be ethical in our job. How can we actually make sure that we don't overexploit biases in order to get a visit when misinformation is such a big problem at the moment. But I think especially younger generations now are way more attuned to, for example, or like they're way more wary about sharing their own search behavior as well. Like I recently had a guest lecture at a university, and a lot of the students were like, I don't even use Google anymore. I use DuckDuckGo because I want everything to be as private as possible. And they're aware of all of the sort of exploitations that marketing does in order to get a visit. So I think the new thing that plays a part, other than the authority and the need for trust, is also the need for authenticity and other voices, such, for example, now a lot of the UGC content is consumed in this part of the messy middle search, continuous loop of evaluation and search. Because sure, we get fed with information that might come from an authoritative source, which is the one we prefer. However, to really trust it, we want to be shown with actual experiences of users who did have an experience with this product, this brand, because we're more aware of the fact that not everything that shimmers is gold on a search engine.
Mhm.
So I think it's in continuous development, but it's also important to take into account the different levels of familiarity as well with the search engine that different audiences might have, and our responsibility in you know just like building up a sustainable and ethical environment.
And everything you said, and also everything said by Garrett, was making me think about something that maybe could be useful for brands, small or big, whatever. Is to we are really used. I mean, the savvy brands are really used to test everything. But usually they test features on the website, and I don't know many that create user groups, maybe segmented per age or for types of target, and ask them to perform some given search queries or to search for something. And so to record how they do search. So to have a statistical, let's say, data in order to inform how they can really know their potential targets are doing a search, and so how to eventually establish a strategy for search. This could be something that could be implemented, and I don't think it's much different than doing focus group on A/B test on how a website is working. No?
Yeah. And I think a lot of the tests, or a lot of the SEO tests that I see implemented are quite biased as well, because we want to obtain a certain results. And a lot of the tests that we do as SEOs are just based on, a certain population that might be our audience, like the focus audience that's already coming to our website, or like that's already searching for a certain query. So definitely, I think UX tests tend to be a bit more like tend to take the demographics more into account. And that's one big thing that I'm trying to push as well with all the brands I work with, the collaboration between SEO and UX. And not only in the ways that we can deliver results, but also in the ways of working, because there's so much overlap in what we're trying to achieve that I think, especially now with all we know from the Google Department of Justice documents as well, like like how we satisfy the user with the result is going to be crucial on how we display on the search engine as well. So yeah, I think you bring up a great point, which is testing, and like how do we make sure that we take into account all of these different populations.
Garrett, what do you
Which
think?
it's also really tricky, right? Like Julia brings up a really good point about selection bias and the risk of choosing people that we want to give us certain results. But like I was reading this really interesting book, Everybody Lies by Seth Stevens Davidowitz, and this 2017, and he's looking at the way that Google search data can inform us. But people, when they're doing like a search, that where they're monitored, like you're saying, Gianluca, there's always there's not this incentive to be truthful, so there's always this risk there in terms of how they're doing it and what conclusions we can make from, which is another big problem in the world of SEO, which is we always want to kind of come to conclusions around causation when we're talking about correlation. When we look at all these different factors and surveys and figuring out why something ranks here and why something ranks there, and saying, oh, someone did this because of that. Someone did this because of that, which is really risky. And so I think the challenge with a lot of this is trying to surface the truth of search behavior, which is becoming even more complex as Google understands the nuances of natural language. And one thing that you've talked about a lot, Gianluca, which I really love, is looking at the Google search results to understand it in whether you're looking at autocomplete, whether you're looking at as they do more AI organized searches and it's surfacing subtopics, clusters of subtopics of content that's related to your search, and using that as a way to say, okay, here's the data that Google's telling us that we can use to inform our content strategy. Here's what Google is rewarding for this type of search that we need to be visible on, whether it's through text content or visual content. We know in the world of e-commerce, which we've all studied in some capacity, is how important visuals are in any sorts of information. I mean, Julia mentioned the UGC, the video content, and the authenticity is how much more video content is showing up in the search. And all of these different elements on a search result is becoming more clear to us that we can use that to inform the way that we stand out and kind of grab that attention from searchers who aren't thinking about Google the way that us as SEOs do.
Totally, totally. Also because, I mean, I don't want to sound polemic or as a Googler. Many times we tend to think, okay, Google is pushing this feature because it's helping them people stay on the search and then see more ads and so earning more money. When we see that in the quarter report, Google is losing money. It's not really because AI overview, for instance, this explosion of AI overview is not really helpful for them in terms of clicking on ads right now. But actually, for instance, I always pay attention, as you were saying, to what are the things that Google is showing us. For instance, we've seen a revival of not really the perspective feature on SERP, but something similar. It's a mix between hidden gems and people also talks about. This is really, and usually presents shorts that can be from Google, YouTube Shorts, and TikTok videos, even I think Instagram Reels. So the short video format is, we all know that it is spreading, it's important, etc., etc. So if you are into international SEO, you maybe already knew that, for instance, shorts are the most consumed type of videos in Egypt, in some country, because they mostly use this for seeing video. But so it's really interesting to notice these things because usually, okay, there always be this sort of bipolar bias by Google. Okay, I need to do money, and I know people use a lot of this, so I use this to make people stay, so they can use the ads, etc., etc. But it's not just using one thing just because of an experiment. It's because people are using that. Maybe it's quite a good recent news about YouTube, and maybe you can be interested about. YouTube is now most viewed for you from what kind of environment of device? Eh? From television.
Really?
The YouTube, yeah, YouTube views, that most views are from TV sets. Which is, I'm really happy because I always see YouTube from sitting on my couch and in front using my TV. I think it's the most comfortable way to see YouTube. So this can be another hint of how people are consuming content on the internet. We don't think TV as a place where you search stuff. But actually YouTube is, we always say, it's the second search engine in the world, and the most views are from television. So people search YouTube from TV. So this is really the exciting things of this search where changes that we are living. Talking about search behavior, surely and biases, you, Giulia, have talked a lot about the brand familiarity. And let's say we always have this sort of polemic in our industry about people blaming Google favoring the big brands over the little guys, let's call them so. Which I don't think it's really true in some niches. Personally, I see many cases where the little guys wins the big guys, depending how well they do the stuff. But let's say that this is the general perception. So in a search environment and search results where mostly people don't click but navigate from SERP to SERP, how can we use the SERP design, the SERP feature, even included AIO, for instance, or other types of search, like the Search GPT result, multimedia answer, or the Perplexity multimedia answer, as a way for showing off, to show off our value as a brand.
Yeah. So he brought up a conversation that I'm like super passionate about, which is the one around brand familiarity. And I think one note that I want to make about brand familiarity, I know that sometimes we tend to believe that this sort of heuristic to go for what we know best benefits the big brands because that's what we see all the time. If I want to do a purchase, then I go on Amazon, like that sort of thing. So, how can small players even get to compete with those? However, I think localization and correct, like trying to really connect with the local user is paramount in this sort of changing behavior because we're fostering this familiarity heuristic. For example, something that I came across recently because we're talking about AI, right? A lot of brands are trying to scale their localization efforts with machine learning. And, in a sea of results where we see the same brand or like the same hoodie being translated as I'm gonna say it in Italian, paura di Dio, which is like fear of God,
Mhm.
the brand for hoodies. Felpa paura di Dio. That doesn't mean anything for an Italian. That
Yes.
like looks weird. Or if the currency, for example, if I'm having a search in the UK and the currency is in US dollars, I'm not gonna trust the result because I want to feel connected to something. Like if I want to transact, I need to feel actual like that I can trust them. And there's been studies on how this mediator role of trust obviously relates to the transaction success, but also comes from a place of feeling connected almost territorially with the brand. So even when brands trying to do campaigns internationally, if their identity is so strongly, for example, US based, their messaging, although in a different locale, doesn't come across as something familiar or something that tries to connect with a user because they just perceive as something that is foreign. So yeah, familiarity in itself is super fascinating and something that definitely brands should invest in with more, especially, small brands. They have a real power there because just by looking after, your local markets, trying to get local consultants to really look after the localization and make sure that the currency is correct, the translations do not say anything weird. I think it's something that in the long term maybe seems like a big effort, but is going to pay back in ways that are, you know, that are really successful because familiarity in itself, it's being studied because like you mentioned, the studies on familiarity, it's been shown how familiar brands can elicit the same marker, preconscious marker as familiar faces or the faces of friends, for example. So we have these a sort of gut reaction toward what we know already because we know that we don't need, if we had a nice experience with somebody or something or a brand, we don't need to evaluate them further. And that spares so many cognitive resources for us. So as a user, obviously, like they have so many decisions to do during the day. They're just going to go for something that feels connected and familiar and brings them back to maybe their roots. And that would open an entire new conversation on the role of emotions in transacting. But I do feel like that's a big thing that maybe brands don't focus on too much, especially when they're big brands and they know that they have a name and tend to, sort of scale maybe quite fast, but not in a way that benefits the user, but more maybe like in the effort of reaching more users.
So maybe for a new brand, in order to catch the attention, it can be not really chasing what the big brands do. It's more like what I really can do, what I really am able to do, what is really my, let's call it my unique selling proposition, but my specialization for it.
Yeah.
And then this can, in an AI search world that is ingesting content of all kinds, this kind of specialization may pay because maybe others are not so specialized. And if you have done things correctly in terms of semantic analysis, semantic search, cousin, busy, you call it cousin, it's not coming, cousin, proximity, and so on, you are going to pop up anyway in this because we know that AI overview, for instance, not necessarily show as a source search results that are in the first page. Because people forget that maybe is also using as a source the search results of the related searches. But that's more going to be pattern. But what I was saying is maybe if we are really concentrating in the not go broad, go really deep, vertical, show your expertise, and then other side of the coin. Many times, big website, brand big website. I'm thinking of a classic, Ferrovie dello Stato. This brand side, horrible usability, and so get a backlash usually. So creating this really specific, really vertical knowledge, expertise that can show also that recognize with your brand, with your target really fast, and then offering a spectacular usability, which improves the engagement signal with Google values. It can be starting making this virtuous flywheel in order, okay, we really know what he's talking about. Plus, it's a wonderful website. Okay, I'm pricing it. I'm starting to clicking more, searching for brand searching with it, with this brand and the keywords I want to search, and so on. And so it's like the classic flywheel where they start taking velocity. And so this could be a strategy that we could use as an SEO, and that can be also actionable for new brands, a smaller website that wants to grow, because it's not asking them to do a gigantic work. They are going to do what they really know to do. Probably this is a way to start gaining this visibility for a brand, for a new brand, that can bring us to a familiarity of a brand instead of just for its position.
Yeah, but also I feel like I I would stress to over-index some things that maybe other brands take for granted. A lot of the time, it's about ease of transaction or ease of decision for the user. If we're already in the run to capture that traffic for somebody that's looking to solve a specific problem, we should be able to provide all the information that they need from the get-go. So if there's free trials, cool, let's put it on a meta description already, or even in the title if we can. Trying to give us as much information as we can,
Mhm.
Early on, because I see so many brands like trying to be mysterious and trying to, I don't know, like, I guess, athletic. But then in the end, I'm like, what are you providing? Like, you're showing up for my results. So I guess to some extent, you do provide what I'm looking for, but I'm going to leave this side because I don't actually know. So if you're competing with a big brand, maybe like say why you against the big brand, like what are your unique selling points, for example, so that it's really easy for the user to make a decision. There's so many exit points at this point. It's no longer a funnel, as Garrett mentioned. It's more like now a labyrinth, but at every turn there's an exit point. So we need to sort of keep the journey going by making things easier for our users.
Totally agree. That's why I was saying about usability. Sure, it's going to be an asset that normally as SEO has given for granted or put it in the fringe of our analysis because it's a web design thing. It's a zero things more now that we saw that it's also going to have as many things. We should not talk anymore about really ranking factor, but signals. And the more positive signal we are giving to search engines, because it's true that we are targeting an audience, but we never should forget, at least this is my opinion, that we are doing it using a mediator, a middleman, which is Google or can be Searchability or can be Perplexity or Bing, if somebody is using Bing. But so this is always the fact. We always should think as our buyer persona is the audience, but the audience persona, as could be a great creator, is also Google, is our audience persona, because he wants to propose what he thinks is good for him, for Google itself. So we should match the two things. But what talking about audience persona, let's say as a last question. Very recently, Ron Fishkin presented a very short video when he was saying maybe SEO should revalue more and better PR, public relation. Not really, he didn't said digital PR, which is something that is assumed, but the digital PR became more like a sort of creating content that journalists love so we can obtain visibility and big links. In this case, I think Rand, I think I'm interpreting it correctly, is like putting yourself in front of the people that really influence these people. So doing public relation, which means eventually creating co-marketing project or something like this. And this, I think, is going to be really interesting in a future whenever Google, for instance, is going to decide to push the AI mode, or when Google is going to push the Gemini widget on Android in the first screen. And if we are a growing brand which struggles to win visibility against the classic Reddit governing all the searches, or Amazon governing all the Google merchant grid and so on, is creating this collaboration, this PR collaboration, in order to have visibility, to take advantage of the visibility. I mean, it sounds a little bit like parasite SEO, but it's not really bad. But it's essentially taking the good idea, which is of this thing, of collaboration, in order to create useful content which is not living on our website, in order to be visible on Answer, because these are the sources that Google is using. This could be a way to consider PR as a way to obtain visibility on search. And we also were talking about behavior searching, and PR for me also means returning to consider the offline marketing opportunities. I'm experimenting lately with some clients in very targeted radio advertisement. And we discovered that radio advertisement is wonderful for improving branded searches, because people pay attention what people say on the radio, or even if it's an ad. And if you have a good tagline, a good advertisement of radio, and people will remember your brand and start searching immediately on Google. So I think that we, as an SEO, and this is not just branded searches as a buzzword, it's really something that we should concentrate, because it's going to be a way to working for the AEAT in general concept. The concept in general is trust, expertise, experience, etc., etc., etc. You as director of marketing and iPullRank, and maybe with clients you're working with iPullRank, and you, Giulia, with your clients, are you already exploring this kind of mestizo marketing, let's call it so, which combines old classic always neglected things with more modern things.
Absolutely. I think that that's what makes SEO so much harder these days is it's all holistic in marketing. SEO is really a channel that can support all of your other marketing efforts. Recently in the US, we just had the Super Bowl, which is like one of the biggest marketing events because you have these advertisements and you read all about what brand was talked about on social media, what brand was searched after that. So many searches result on that type of marketing. With digital PR, yes, there's always going to be that like kind of listicle, editorial, product review type of marketing. And there's a certain amount of authority bias that happens there where you trust the people that are writing about you if you like those brands. But there's also the partnership marketing. And there's this halo effect that if you have a really cool brand and you do a partner co-marketing, campaign and you're associated with that brand, the halo effect is you get some sort of that brand positive sentiment paid off on you. One great example of that was a couple of summers ago, the Barbie movie got a lot of great publicity, and you saw Xbox and you saw Airbnb and you saw all these brands do co-marketing, and that saw a spike in Google Trends in searches for those associated brands. The other thing I wanted to address is you're talking specifically about, how we need to get more specific with our marketing, and everything's getting so much more volatile. We've seen more algorithm updates over the last 24 months than we've seen in the last 15 years. And so as we get more personalized with our result, all of individuals context and what we search for and what we like is going to influence the search results we see. Makes it harder for marketers and SEOs to monitor performance. But if everyone's starting to get slightly different types of results, whether it's through Google AI organized searches or ChatGPT, there's an opportunity for brands to make sure you're visible, whether it's through digital PR, but also just putting as much information out there. And it doesn't even have to be textual. Like as AI, like Perplexity, we were doing some research of how it uses YouTube to do a lot of their sourcing, but it's not necessarily doing the descriptions on the YouTube videos. It's actually transcribing the audio and using that information to inform what search is relevant. So if you start having all these influencers or different brands talking about you, that's another source of why you're going to end up being more visible in all these different searches. So SEO is becoming harder because it's not just SEO, it's this building visibility through all your other marketing channels, which will ultimately benefit you to show up when someone searches for something relevant to your product, your topic, your industry.
Yeah, I think also like you both brought up really important points. The first one that you made, Gianluca, about collaboration and PR, I think it's great because it brings out the discourse that I've been having with a lot of clients as well, which is about SEO and its role in capturing demand versus creating demand. But especially if brand searches are going down, right? Like, how do I make sure that I use SEO to make the brand searches pop up again? Theoretically, I really can't on SEO alone, right? So I will need that sort of other channel. And I love the example that you've made with the radio, for example, the radio ads. There's actually studies on how we seem to engage better with audio material, especially when it's coming to perceiving a story on Audible, for example, which was this study that's been done by Joe Devlin at UCL, versus a book, for example, or a I think it was a movie or a video of the same story. So I think there's an element of actually how we react to these different ads formats because we just hear, like what it's about, but we don't have distracting elements that we might have in videos, for example. So we form an image and then we go look for this information to sort of fill in the voids. But I did see something similar happening with a brand that I was working with. Again, some of the brand searches were going down, but then there was like around a week or so, there was a spike up and there was nothing from the SEO side that could have explained just like the name of the brand spiking up. So I looked at what ads went live in that time frame. And what I discovered was that TV ads had been reinstalled in that particular week. So we had an influx of people just looking for the brand and see what it's about. So it's important to put ourselves in the eyes like in front of the eyes of a new audience with, like maybe what is perceived as old marketing, but still is quite, now that SEO is becoming more complicated, it's quite important to acknowledge. And then what you were saying, Garrett, about, collaborating with influencers and like having your name with all of these other people, I think it strengthens your position as a brand because every mention counts as a vote of confidence. And I think especially in, this journey where we're evaluating a tons of options, every, vote of confidence, like the reviews even that we see on the SERP, counts as a signal for us to really trust this brand, trust the product. And these in turns feeds into the social proofs, but also the availability heuristics, like if the availability heuristics essentially is when we tend to think about something based on how, like, I'm not explaining this well, but based on how frequently or like how recent it is in our mind. And that can be modulated by how recent a memory was, how frequent, or how, like vivid it is in our mind. So essentially, we just go with whatever is mostly available in our mind. And if I see, for example, a certain brand being mentioned a number of times during a day, then if I want to purchase something that this brand is offering, I'm more likely to go to this brand instead of maybe something else because it's just like, easy for me. That's information that comes naturally to my mind. So that's a tons of way that SEO and collaboration with these other channels can improve even the search journey by tapping into these biases without exploiting them, I should mention, but just like by understanding how the human mind works, so that we can make the journey easier for the user.
Wonderful, wonderful. I mean, I love all this, everything of this conversation, and sincerely, I will go on and on, but it would be maybe too much. So let's have a let's give us a promise. Let's say 1 year, next year, let's return and let's see what happens. If everything, what this kind of revolution that we are seeing and experiencing live is going to go. And so before saying hello to you and to the public, let's do the first questionnaire. The first questionnaire is just a few questions, really simple, really somehow say personal, but not too personal. But you should answer almost without thinking, because so they can offer us a glimpse of you outside of being the wonderful marketers you are. So let's start. Giulia first, then Garrett, and then who wants to answer first? Giulia, what is your favorite word?
I could have cheated this, but I'm gonna be true to myself and say lilac. I like the color, I like the alliteration, so lilac is my favorite word.
And you, Garrett?
And my favorite word is curiosity. It's just fun to say, and I think it really embodies kind of what I think life is all about.
Cool, cool. Yeah, it's knowing you, it's really portraying you as a word, I think. You're a curious. And what is your least favorite word?
Okay, I'm gonna say enemy. I don't like having like I'm not one for confrontations or wars or drama, so I'm like enemy. I don't like.
I hate to get political with fascism. I hate I hate that word. I hate what it entails. And it
Yeah,
sounds yucky.
yes, in Italian, I'm sorry for the existence of that word. And, we always support the good and the bad. So, what turns you on?
For me, it's learning new things. I can go deep into rabbit holes and I seem to never have enough of it, which is distracting because like I do have a full-time job. But for example, right now I'm looking into a neuroscience study about how we react to AI stimuli versus human stimuli in the effort of understanding, is there an actual difference? Do we have this sort of pre-conscious response to AI stimuli that's different from human stimuli. Because if we don't, then it poses a case for ethical rules for the to prevent misuse of AI. So yeah, we'll see how that goes.
Oh, that's really interesting because I can think more than the textual side of AI, especially the most complex is going to be the visual part. Not only the image, but the incredibly progressing capabilities of video for AI. And it's becoming really, really hard to understand and discriminate between real video and deepfakes, for instance. So that kind of study can bring can maybe it came out that we have some spidey sense, like Spider-Man, in order to understand by intuition that something is not so correct from the very beginning. So I'm really looking forward to this research. And you, Garrett?
Kind of geeky, but I will say psychology and reading. I've been on a massive like psych reading kick. The last 2 years have just been like everything from like Kahneman and Urelia and Cialdini, and currently just finished this book about, I was saying earlier, Everybody Lies, which is just about Google searches. So that psych and reading, but also AI. I do really like all the AI stuff. I don't care what anyone says. I think it's gonna unlock so many doors for us.
Hmm. So let's go sensorial. We're talking about video and image. Let's go about sound. What sound do you love, Julia?
I love the sound that my blades make when I skate on wild ice or on ice in general. It's like insane, beautiful.
Cool.
And I love the sound of my little daughter's voice, her toddler voice. It's her giggles, her laughs, everything that comes out of her mouth, my heart just goes bum, bum, bum.
And what sound do you hate?
The alarm in the morning. I'm not a morning person at all.
No, no, me neither. And I'm glad I work at home.
Don't tell my boss, but, Slack notifications, there's just something about that. No, but in reality, I have this weird thing where it's like rubbing carpet is like one of those makes my hair on my arms stand up, so, like, the sound of someone rubbing carpet is like one of those.
Yeah. And you also the tactile sensation if a carpet is too rough. Yeah. So let's talk dirty. What is your preferred curse word?
So I'm gonna say something in Venetian because I use it a lot and I'm Venetian. So tomare, which just means your mom. And I use
Ah,
it a lot. It's not a curse word per se, but I feel like I have to censor myself here. But tomare is a good one.
okay. And you?
I will not censor. I like the word fuck. I It's so versatile. You can use it in all sorts of different ways, and I can use it right now because, like, my daughter's not at the age where she'll repeat it, but, like, once she says it back to me, then I'll probably be a little more conservative with when it's comes out of my mouth.
And so, what profession were you dreaming to do? What you wanted to do when you were a kid?
I do have a kindergarten booklet where I say that I wanted to be a brain doctor. So to an extent, I guess I got there and then ended up in marketing. But otherwise, I would be an ice skater, a full-time professional ice skater.
And for me, I kinda always wanted to be an actor. That's why I do these videos, do the late night host thing, try to be funny, rarely successful, but, I do my best, and if it wasn't that, I would actually be a high school teacher. I was an elementary school teacher for a while, got a little burnt out, but if I went back, I think it'd be a lot of fun to
That must be
teach.
really
And
hard to take.
oh, not being funny, yeah, no, I mean, I try.
And so, last question. Let's say a poet, an Italian poet, was saying that everybody is immortal until when somebody else is remembering you, having a memory of you, which can be, if you are lucky, many, many centuries. We are going to be immortal. So, going more with our feet on the earth, how would you like to be remembered?
So if I was to keep this for my professional career, I would say I would like to be remembered as somebody who made advancements for the industry in an ethical way. However, because we're just, people on a floating rock and none of this is going to matter when I die, then I would like to be remembered as somebody, like someone good who made an impact on someone and on people's lives. Not everyone, but just like the people closest to me.
Wow, that's good.
Yeah, that's how I am. It's just as long as I'm remembered as a good father, a good husband to my family, that's what matters the most. Outside, to Julia's point, grand scheme of things, existentialism doesn't matter. So why not just be a good story in someone else's narrative? Because we're all just stories in the end of it.
Cool, cool. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Garrett. It was a wonderful conversation, and I really look forward next year to have an update with everything that happened in between. Thank you, everybody who attended the search session, and I hope you enjoyed and look forward for the next episode with other two great guests.